So this is me. Twitter's a great place. Michael didn't bring it up, but if you're not on Twitter, please get on it. Most of the people that are currently active in the software test community, we all have Twitter accounts right now, and we tend to chatter at each other. And this is a great medium because it limits us to 144 characters. And if you can't tell, a lot of us are very chatty, so this is a good thing. A lot of us are also very open. There's an old saying in the software testing community: if you meet somebody who wants to charge you for their knowledge, run. We don't tend to do that. If you just want to reach out to us and ask us a question, generally we'll start answering you. If we feel like there should be a consulting fee, we'll probably raise that issue with you. But for the most part, we're pretty open with our knowledge and our experience and helping you enter this fun world of software testing. So, another question I have is, how many of you are currently working? So we're going to get started. How many of you are currently working on Agile projects, even if you secretly suspect it's not Agile? Somebody has told you you are Agile. How many of you are afraid that you're going to start doing that soon, even if you're not now? Awesome. Okay. How many of you are currently doing Agile in the Scrum model? Yeah, that's usually the gateway drug for Agile. I've met a couple of companies that started out doing something like Kanban or XP, but they're kind of rare. Most everybody goes into Scrum first. So just out of curiosity, how many people are doing like a Kanban or a Lean model right now? Yeah, you don't count. Okay. All right, good. Because I'm happy about that because it's sort of tailored toward a Scrum model. Yes? XP as a project management thing is actually a thing. It is actually how you would manage your project as you're running through it. XP is also, it's a little bit nerve-wracking because it's also a technology and some other things, but the XP process is actually one of the most proscriptive forms of Agile there is, because if you don't do everything in it, it will fail. So you have to have a co-located team, you have to all be working in the same space, literally shoulder to shoulder, and you have to have a customer person there with you to do your validation as soon as something's available. Which is why not a lot of companies do it. Because it's a large investment, and a lot of people just can't do it. They don't have a customer they can put in there. And it has to be a customer. It can't be a product manager who thinks like a customer, because that's not going to give you the feedback you need. You could still be wrong. And you're moving so fast that you can't afford to be wrong. So again, that's why it's a good question. Thank you. But no, that actually is why XP is actually kind of a project management thing in this context. So, and there's also Lean. There are hired Lean startups and things, but there's also a Lean project management thing that came up with the Mary Poppendieck and her husband came up with it. But yeah, so that's why I asked these questions. So good. So you've got your Scrum model going. You're looking at this mobile app, and somebody says, we're going to release a new major feature for this. First sprint starts, we're going to be launching, and we're going to have the first user stories. Feature's going to be delivered, and it's in 2 weeks. Go. Now, under the old model of software development, well, as you can see as I do this, I'm doing a Kanban approach to speaking. So as soon as I bring something, if you see me move a node across, that's why. Because I have a bad memory. Under the classic model, we would sit down and we'd get some specs and we'd do some requirements analysis. We would set up our systems, we would do our planning, our resourcing. We would suddenly start saying, okay, well, I'm going to need this server, that server. I need to go back and get some more detail on this spec because I don't quite understand it. And then we would wait to get something and we'd start testing on it and we'd be done and there'd be a test phase and we'd say, okay, is there a gated thing, an exit criteria? Yeah. A lot of work, not a lot of testing. We don't have that luxury in the mobile world and especially on the Agile teams that are working in it. So my problem was, how did I get started working quickly so that I wasn't just sort of slapping around in the dark trying to do stuff? And that's when I stumbled across James Whitaker's blog post about the 10-minute test plan. So the 10-minute test plan is also called, getting Michael germs here. The 10-minute test plan is also called the ACC method. And we'll sort of get into that in a little bit. But the ACC method basically says you already know, unless you're coming into this project completely green with no knowledge whatsoever, you already know a bunch of stuff about this product. And you can get it written down and you can start your planning right away. So, the parts of this that you also understand are sort of broken down into three things. ACC, attributes, components, and capabilities. So, you have your attributes, which are the things your company values about your product. That it's fast, that it's accurate, that it's useful, that it's intuitive, whatever it is. These are the things the company's looking to get out of it that are going to be your value statements for this. The components are the parts of the project that you're looking at. They could be some things like feature sets, they could be user stories, they could be technical specifications, like you have an app layer, you have a data layer, you have a single sign-on service provider, you have whatever, however you want to break it up, doesn't really matter, because this is a thought process for getting all this stuff down. Then you have your capabilities. And these are sort of mapped orthogonally to, okay, I'm looking at my app layer and it's supposed to be intuitive. What are we doing to show that that's intuitive? If it sounds kind of confusing, let's sort of map that out. And so we're going to start the process with that mobile app you just downloaded a little bit right now. So one of the things my company values about this is that it is easy, that it's accurate, that it is fast, and let's just go ahead and say that it's reliable. Those are the things that we value about it. Now just looking at that, what are some of the things that you would say are components? Just go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. Well, let's actually put that up here. That's a good one. That may be an attribute that we missed. So we thought of these, we thought, okay, well maybe that it's portable. We'll use that word and we'll put a question mark on it and say, let's get a better word for that. But so that was a good thing. We just identified something we may have missed in our planning for that. So is there any other components people can think of? Pardon? That would be sort of covered in devices, because devices don't usually run more than one operating system. So components. So what are some of the components that you can see? Some of the things about that mobile app that you're looking at. Okay. I'll just put up maps. We see there are some maps on there. Okay. So different user types. Yes. Oh, good one. Okay. It seems like a good list to start with. So then, when we go across here, we take a look at this and say, how are we verifying that the login is accurate? Say, okay, well maybe we can test with different users. So, So under personas, like you can say, oh, that it's fast. Maybe we try somebody with like 100 fields. How fast does that load? Maybe somebody with like weird weather. So how does like strange weather conditions happen on our map when we pull it up? We have overlays on that. We're seeing, oh, overlays. Does this look like anything to anybody? To me, that looks an awful lot like test planning. And you are doing that right now without seeing a single spec for this product, without seeing a single technical requirement, without seeing a single user story. We are now in the middle of test planning. I know you're all looking at me curiously. So then what do you do with it, right? So what we do with it is this is, again, James Whitaker had said something else yesterday that I found incredibly interesting. But I'm going to steal it and pull it in and use it for my own thing. I'm going to appropriate it, I guess, as you would call it. He talked about intent. That we need to be designing for the intention of the user. this is what we're doing here. We are sort of mapping out our intentions, which is what test planning should be. We should be saying, what do we intend to do to verify this, to gather the information, to sort of look at the areas where we can break things. And this is what we're listing up here. The things we put on here will then lead to other stuff, like say, okay, well, if we're going to be testing on multiple devices, we need devices. If I'm going to be running stuff, should I automate it? Should I not automate it? Can I automate it? But all that stuff is sort of filling in the blanks, sort of trying to make it happen. If you're working on a device where you have 2 weeks to do it, you can say, what can I do in this 2 weeks? And get agreement, probably within the first day, about what you can drop and what you don't have to drop. And you're putting it in a format that they can understand. So, this was awesome, but it doesn't also really cover the full gamut of what we're going to be doing. And to do that, I had to come into something that James and John Bach created called session-based testing. How many of you are familiar with session-based testing? No, you don't count again. It is a form of exploratory testing, yes. But it's the best way to describe it is guided exploratory testing. So, as we're saying, we just walked through, I want to test it on multiple devices. So, perhaps you get a little more specific and say, I want to be able to test on the HTC One. Because a lot of our customers have that, which actually they do, so we do that. You say, I want to be able to test on the HTC One, I want to be able to do this, and that right there is a session. So what you would do is you would start out by writing that down and say, I would like to spend an hour just running through the HTC One and seeing if it works, testing the maps, testing the screen size, and then that's it. Then you would spend an hour just doing that, no interruptions, no email, no meetings. You're just working on the HTC One, and when the hour is done, you stop. And you're taking notes as you do it about what you're finding. When you're done, you go back to your notes and say, which of this stuff that I just noted down is a bug, which of it is something I need to follow up on? What did I learn from this session? Sometimes you don't learn anything, which is okay. You can go back and retool your session, or you can say, that was great, let's move on to something else. But often, if this is the initial part of it, you find out a bunch of stuff that you didn't want to follow up on. So that either leads to new sessions, or that leads to bugs, or test cases, or whatever you want to call it. But the final piece of the session-based testing, which a lot of people miss, is called the retrospective. And that's where you meet with somebody, and you actually physically go over with them what you did in that session. And this is very important because it provides a second set of eyes to what you just did, and tells you, oh, did you hear what you just said right there? That sounds interesting. Maybe you should follow up on that. Or, wow, that sounds like you were really blocked on that. You need help on blocking. And it keeps you moving forward. But what we aren't doing is we aren't writing a whole bunch of scripted test cases with expected pluses and minuses and doing our arrays and doing our boundary value analysis and all this other stuff because we don't have time. We may end up doing that if our sessions and our testing sort of leads us in that direction. But honestly, it seems like we spend a lot of time doing that even if we don't need to do it. All right. So we've done this initial thing right here. And usually at this point, we can either go in and start doing some stuff on that mobile app you've got right there. And for context, if you want to log in, let's see, there's an eraser here somewhere. I just realized I didn't give you the login. I should have made a note for that. I've set up an account you guys should be able to use. To sign in. Okay. What I'd like you to do is use that sign in. TWIQA plus ALMForum at climate.com. And the password is really, really secure. Test 1, 2, 3. Yes. The password is. So it has to be capital T, test 1, 2, 3. Climate.com. Yeah, this is incredibly secure, by the way. So, now using the attributes we talked about before, so basically take those little pieces of paper that you've got right there. So using the attributes so with those attributes that we had, I'd like you to go through that and explore and think of some components and start jotting down some notes about what your intention would be for this. We're going to spend about 10 minutes doing that, then we're going to come together and talk about what we're doing with that. Because the best way to do this is actually do it. I can sit up here and talk about it, and it seems incredibly simple. But once you start doing it, you'll find it's actually a lot easier and a lot more fun than you think it is. You can also talk amongst yourselves if you want to. Yes, I can. Yeah, that's a little trick that we use with our Google accounts. That if you do that plus thing, it will actually resolve back to the original email account, so you can add whatever you want in there. So TWIQA at climate.com is an actual email account that we use for testing. We can put plus whatever, and it will actually resolve in Google back to and send us an email to TWI at climate.com. So feel free to use that if you want to. Yes. Okay. It helps, or you can just go and find somebody who doesn't need to do that, and you can work together. So, it's at Climate Corp. Sorry. That was the parts you fill in the middle. That was the stuff that you do. I wasn't going to do this until later, but people are looking confused, so I will go ahead and I forgot they made us go into dual validation sign-ins. I'm just going to bring up what one of these things looks like that I actually built and we use in real life. Oh, okay. That's why I'm going to bring this up real quick, because you probably won't be able to read it. So that's what it looks like, the one that I built. And under this, and it looks kind of sparse. Let's see, this should be coming up. That is the number of entries in here that for some reason are not coming up on this Windows machine. Okay, I apologize for this. This works incredibly well on my Mac. But those numbers, as you can see here, represent entries for individual stuff that I put in there. So under useful, this is actually for a thing we're releasing and you won't be able to see on the phone, which is why I'm okay showing this to you, so I'm not going to sort of push you in any direction, shape, or form. But this is for our current release that we're going to be releasing here in 48 hours, or thereabouts. And I'm still here, so because I'm incredibly comfortable about this release. Those represent entries that I made for things that we needed to do, or intentions for testing it. So in this case, we're going to be logging out planting activity on a field, and I had 5 items that I meant to check and look at and see, is this going to be actually accurate? Could be tasks, they could be, that's why I like to call them intentions, because it's just notes to myself. And the other beautiful thing about this is I can show this to anybody on my team and get their sign off on what I'm about to do without any translation whatsoever. I can bring it to a product owner who is a farmer by trade, an agriculturalist. I've worked with remote sensing specialists and agronomists. I've even worked with chief technology officers and shown him. I usually get to laugh, so you can laugh now. And they've actually been able to understand this fairly well and say, yeah, that looks good. Sometimes they focus on the number and they say, well, 5 seems low. And I'll say, well, why? Why does 5 seem low to you? Let's talk about what's actually in there. And that starts the conversation going. But they can also say, wait, why aren't you doing much on compatibility? Which is a device thing for me. And I can bring up, well, it's because we don't have the devices. And I'll be using an emulator. Well, once you use a simulator, that starts why a simulator probably wouldn't be a good deal for what we're trying to do for this one. In this case, it was because geolocation in a simulator is very, very different than on a device. And a lot of this has to do with geolocation. So that was just the decision we made. Either we could delay the release, or we could just go with it and keep track of our telemetry and see what that. But it's a risk we identified and put up at the beginning and said, let's just talk about it right now. And agree to it before we get to the last minute and it becomes a deal breaker. Yep. And it also says I've only got a couple of things on security. In this case, it's because the last release we really hammered on security, and we aren't touching it this time around. So it would be regression, if anything. But we thought we should touch it because it's very important to us. So actually, I had to take some stuff off there. And this is also nice because this plan has changed at least 6 times that I know of in the last month. So as our design has evolved, as features have sort of bubbled to the surface and be reprioritized or deprioritized, and so I've had to change this thing at least 6 times to sort of match that. And sometimes it was because we deprioritized things. Sometimes it was because as I was doing this, I asked questions that people said, oh, yeah, that's a really good question. We should probably talk about that. Issues with usability, issues with how farmers actually think of things. But if I had spent 2 or 3 days working on a test plan and done my resourcing and then had my specs and my strategies, that would have been most of my time. I was just reworking all of that and then getting approval, doing a documentation review, yada, yada, yada. So that's part I'm apologizing for, because on my Google browser, on Chrome, you can actually see these things pop up and there's entries below it that give you what those intentions are. And then you can talk about that. So underneath for the accuracy, I have things like partial planting, planting on multiple fields at the same time, different types of plant. What happens if you say, if the field is listed as a cornfield, but you say, I planted barley, how is that going to affect our system? You know, basically I was trying to do what Michael talked about before, which is, that's great, the happy path stuff, I'm mentally moving a note across. The happy path stuff, I'm expecting the developers to check, which is, does it work? If they can't tell me that question, if they hand me code and they can't say, yeah, it works, then I hand it back and say, well, bring it back to me when you say it does. Well, I have to. Yeah, in order to be able to do this, it has to work. But it wastes my time and theirs to be playing nanny, to be saying, yes, you did your job. So that's another thing I don't have time for in these releases. So in order to do this, I have to do the happy path stuff. I have to be able to validate it works. But I'm more interested in where does it not work? Where does it do things we don't expect? And that's what this is. I don't concern myself with their user stories because they're working on the user story and they can verify it. I use it as a guide for this. Yes? Oh, that just means there's one thing. Yeah. Sometimes it's a really big item. Sometimes it's a really big item, like, you know, for security it says, you know, hey, we can't use the phone to hack our database. And that would be a really, really big item. And I have to, but that for me is a note to myself to say, make more items and figure out what that would mean. Yes? Yeah, that's one of the things that changed. Because as we began developing it, we began to use modular components. So the components for each of these activities that we can do are essentially the same with one or two changes. And so they used to have a whole bunch of stuff in there for all of them, which then bubbled up to say, really, why are you doing that? And that was because, well, it's because these are all different. And they said, well, what if we just did this? And I'm like, that would be amazing. And we went right back to having like common classes and actually coding in object-oriented principles, which for some mobile developers seems foreign. But we began doing that. And because we were doing that, I was able to like bubble up a lot of the common testing into the first one, which in this case was planting. And then sort of touch on what are the features that are unique to the other types of activities. So it saved me a lot of time, allowed me to do other things, and kept the project moving forward so we could be on time. And it was, but again, we couldn't do that unless I'd asked this question early, before they'd begun coding. By bringing that point up to say this is going to be a huge problem for us if we do this all independent, if these are all independent components, they were able to say, okay, well, let's not do that. And they didn't have to go back and refactor everything and then make them be late within their cycle. Pardon? Oh yeah, I'm bigger than them. So they're scared of me when I come walking up. So I use fear as a weapon sometimes, not just humor. And a lot of these also then turned into test sessions that we track in Jira. So I associate those. Somebody asked a question about documentation. But a lot of these then get tracked in Jira as test sessions, which then we have a historical record of what I did and where we're at, which is a common reporting mechanism that we all use. I'm not incredibly happy with how the Jira does it in the test session, but it was a choice we made because everybody else is using Jira, and it's easier to have one dashboard where you can track the project with everybody. And this got me into that dashboard. But before we began doing this sort of planning, then with test sessions, I was not in that dashboard. So the testing activity was like a giant black box where we pushed code in and bug reports came out. And nobody quite knew how long it took us to do anything, including me. By putting that stuff in there, it gives me a way that I can monitor what I'm doing and then more accurately predict the effort we're going to need to move forward. And because I'm not spending a huge amount of time doing detailed planning, we can do it quickly, get the benefit from it, and move on. And also pivot and change as we need to. Yes? Way in the back. Yes? That is a good point. That actually got raised as an issue with this current one because we have dependencies, third-party dependencies on our public APIs, which weren't going to be turned on until 2 days ago. So how do we get around that? Which then meant I got to develop mock objects that we could use, and I also learned how to compile and run our code on Xcode and Android SDK. So I could do my own private builds and verify things as developers said, can you check that for me? So I actually became part of the development process because we couldn't afford to wait till the 8th day, and then 2 days later we shipped. Sometimes, yes, it depends. The API stuff, I do have to go back and verify because we are now live with the APIs, and that never behaves like your mocks will. But how we deal with that information coming through, I've already checked. So now it's just the handshake I'm checking, not the actual full round-trip cycle. So I do have to go back, but it's not a full go back and test everything. And we do, of course, every time you release, you always go through and just do a quick smoke test and say, is anything going boom in my face? Did we make the battery explode? Which actually happened to a friend of mine. All these other things like that, you do that before you go just because, you know, we're perfectionists and we like to ship good products that people inspire joy and happiness in our users. Because then they give us their money, and that's nice. But by sort of blocking this stuff out and saying what your intentions are at the beginning, you can start thinking about how am I going to do that. And that's a lot of what we do when we do this documentation ahead of time in our planning. Most of the test plans that I've ever written, I'll just go back and say under the old model, I wrote a lot of those in my life. Almost nobody read beyond the executive summary. Which was awesome because I could always say, well, it's in the test plan, didn't you read it? No matter what somebody brought to me. And they would say, well, of course not, it's 25 pages. I'm like, yeah. But why not just do, then somebody said, why don't we just do the executive summary? Which is great, and that shaved off like a week of my planning time. But then I got into this world where even a day was too much. I need to be working immediately, so that's when I shaved it down even more, and then I stumbled across this. So this is actually what I do in my head when I'm writing that plan. So why don't I just do that? Yes? I would say yes, but I would also then ask you back, was there a small amount of... Yes, I would just say yes. But then it also frees up my product owners from having to write clear and detailed requirements and specifications. Yeah. So it also answers the question for Scrum, how do you start when it says, as a user, I would like a mobile device that works so that I can do work. Like, how do you start working off of that? So you can either push it back and say, give me a better requirement, in which case you end up with user stories that are basically detailed technical specs, which I've seen a lot. This is our user story. You know, we need to be able to enable SSO using, you know, Touchstone that does the following. It's like, well, I don't know of any user out there who says, my value is going to be awesome if you could use Touchstone. I would be amazed at that. It happens, I've seen it, but most users, especially in the mobile world, don't care. The value to them is going to be, when I log on, other people can't view my field data. Or I only see my data. Or you know who I am as I move around if I go from the website to the mobile phone and back. That's the user story. That's what we should be testing for. That's what this gets me. Yeah. That's actually what happened when we were doing this. This process, again, I said this changed like about 6 times. Some of that was that. They would give us a requirement that they didn't realize could be interpreted like 6 different ways. And I interpreted a 7th. And they said, that's not it. And I said, well, that's what this says, or looks like. Because actually a lot of times my requirements are just wireframes that I get, mock-ups of what it should look like on the mobile device. And we have to sort of extrapolate out what that means. But that's a conversation. I love having that conversation, but I'd rather have it day 2 than day 10. Yes. But they were in order, though. So this is the sign-in page, this is the field page, this is, yeah, but But no, but again, it's great because it's a conversation, and we can have that conversation and do the full thing in about an hour, as opposed to a full day of somebody sitting at their Word trying to type it out in real text. So, yes, you were first, and then yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. Yeah. You, as a tester, you kind of have to, that's one of the reasons why I brought up the theater thing. That's actually why I'm kind of good at it, is because as a theater and as an actor and as a writer, I had to learn how to put somebody else's skin on and wear it. And as a tester, we should be doing that. We should be saying, in my case, as a corn farmer in Iowa, how am I going to use this? What's going to be important to me? Where am I going to use this? Out in the field, what does that mean? Well, it means that I'm going to be pulling out my mobile device in a field where there's no shade, which means this layout is not going to work because I won't be able to see it. And I have to be able to come back with that. So yes, there's some amount of business analysis you have to do, but you're basically saying this is why it's valid. You're checking it like an editor would an article that came into them. You're not writing it, but you're saying here's where I think it needs to be tweaked or could be made better, or I don't understand what you mean by that. Because if we're not testing the value and the intention, we're just kind of checking stuff off. And yes. That's often what I do in Sprint Zero. When people are doing their prototyping and coming up with how are we going to attack this problem, I'm providing feedback to them about how we should probably do it so it can be testable. But honestly, I'm too hyperactive to sit there and just wait for a question. So I'll usually be doing automation against the regression or against the happy path stuff. We're moving to the realm where the developers, again, unit testing and automated acceptance testing is an incredibly foreign concept to a lot of mobile developers. They don't understand, but thankfully my team is doing that because a lot of them came from the web background. So they're starting to put more unit tests and acceptance tests or specification by example type of design into what they're doing. So a lot of that automation is starting to bubble up already. And then I'm just filling in the gaps where, okay, we had this bad bug. Let me make sure I automate to make sure we don't bring it back up again. Well, yeah, but there's things, but there's a lot of tools you can use for that to be able to pull stuff up. I mean, there's a lot of the stuff is record and play for the automation tools, but you don't have to use it that way. When you're doing a mobile development, a lot of times they'll basically have like just a static frame that pulls up. I'm also lucky in that a lot of our functionality is API based. So I can write a bunch of integration tests that are just hitting the API directly and passing through JSON objects and saying, give me that back. Or I can pass it into our phone and say, give it back to me. So I can test that handshake, both from our device as well as within our services. So I can be doing that testing even if there isn't a baked UI. Also, a lot of the things are becoming a lot better. Some of the tools that we're using right now are based upon like Selenium WebDriver or Ruby WebDriver. So you can actually pull out the object itself, the object ID, and use it, and not have to worry about the ordinals or go to this XY coordinate. So, which is, if we had to do that, then yeah, automation, I would not be automating at all. Because I remember visual test and how much pain that was. I will never go back there again. So, yeah, so the tools are sort of catching up with what we want to do. But yeah, there's always something you can be doing. And if your teams are designing the application well, so it's testable, you can do things. Yes? He is distracting, yes. We are, but we could do a better job of that. We're making the transition from scrappy startup to large company. that needs to actually care about our customers because we're not scrambling to find them. Yeah, but most of the stuff we were doing was say, okay, we knew who our users were. Because again, when you're doing agricultural insurance, you're not going to be selling to boat owners unless farmers own boats. But that's really going to be ancillary to what you're trying to do. So we knew who our customers were. We went after them. Well, actually, we kind of didn't. We can talk about this after, about the evolution of the company. But it's been about 7 years, and we've only been doing crop insurance for about 5. We first began doing this, I jokingly call it like the Superman 2 business plan, because we were going to put out insurance for people who were traveling. And if you had a bad weather during your trip, you would get money. So, yeah. No, we get feedback, and we're starting to do a lot more analytics, telemetry, for when people are using it, how they're using it, what their experience was, how many times do they stay on a page before they move around, how are they getting to this information. And we're also doing a lot more of it from the back end as well, so we're tracking sessions. So when somebody makes a request, where does that request go within our database? How many times are we hitting the data? Do we need to hit it that many times? You know, so it's both, we're tracking our users as well as ourselves to sort of get this basic telemetry about how can we make it a better experience. We have 1 or 2, yeah. We have 1 or 2 data scientists, yeah. And we have 1 or 2 more now that Monsanto's joined us. So. No, we have a business partner telling us what they want. And we're also having to support a couple of new applications now. We acquired a couple of more companies that have their own mobile app that we're going to have support. So this is becoming even more important because now I have to do this for 3 different products, not just this one. So I have even less time to do planning. But yeah, so we have business partners who are using it. We have product owners who come from an agrarian background, and they tell us this is what I would want. You know, this is what's useful to me on a mobile device. You know, this is where the whole activity logging came from. So I want to go out to my field and be able to say, yeah, I planted that field. Not have to go all the way back to my house, boot up my Windows XP, which a lot of them still use, and start doing all that stuff in a batch. Oh, no, go ahead. Yes, but not as much as you think. Because we have a reinsurer that we go through. So, but there is some regulation. There's also regulation because we're talking about whether we're going to be bringing in PCI data when people but it's in. So there is some regulation, but there's not a huge amount. Although I have done this in regulated industries, like say healthcare. Yeah, that's actually I'm glad you brought that up. That was a note that I don't normally get to, but this actually works incredibly well in a compliance environment. Because the one thing that auditors love is they want 2 things. And here's the intent. Here's the big secret for auditing. I'm going to spill it out for you right now. Auditors want to know what you planned on doing and then what you did. And that's it. Well, documented somehow. The old school ones want like giant reams of paper. Others are perfectly okay with just seeing something that's under version control that you can point to. So I actually worked with a bunch of auditors in a healthcare company I was working with that was doing software to help people do case studies for drugs coming to market. And I sat down with the auditors and walked them through this process. They lost their minds. They said, you mean you're going to tell me exactly what you did at all point in time, and you'll document it using this for your planning, and you'll have sessions that say what you actually did as you were doing it. And I'll say, yes. They say, how can we get more people to do that? Because normally what they get is a detailed description and a checkbox said, yes, I did that, but they don't really know if you actually did that, you just check the box. If I take notes as I go along, they know that I did that. Because I'm taking notes about it. So they like that a lot more. Yes, I know, I keep getting past you, go ahead. Yes. I'm about to blow your mind a little bit. We don't have test cases. Yeah, we don't. We don't have test cases anywhere. That's not true. We have automation that we run, which could be considered a test case, but I don't write down test cases anywhere. So we don't have a need for a TCM. The only thing we have are those test sessions that we put into Jira, and that's for just tracking for effort to see where are we at and what's our velocity for our testing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we do document our sessions and we document our intention. Remember, we're documenting this, we're documenting our sessions, and we have our requirements that have then been fleshed out more based upon this. So what more would a test case give you? In fact, I would say this is probably more useful. It's what I did. If you want to call that a test case, sure. We'll call it a test case. Yeah. This is my intention, and then the sessions say what actually happened. And those two things are what you can do to do your knowledge transfer. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, we do. They didn't used to do anything before, so anything was better than nothing. It was very heavily engineering based, so they were allowed this idea of like, oh hey, let's just write a bunch of automation using RSpec or Cucumber. Actually, the test cases aren't what defend us from that. It's the documentation that we did something. If you're using test cases for that, that's awesome. But the intention to say we did look at that, and then what did we actually do? Again, going back to the compliance thing, you can say I ran this test case 100,000 times, and some say, well, obviously it wasn't a good test case because we just saw that, and now we're suing you. If I go into court with a documentation trail saying, here's what I intended to do, here's what I actually did, that's actually much stronger than just a bunch of, automation scripts or whatever. So, because people understand that. Mm-hmm. Yep. No, and if you want to find some litigious people, go ahead and go after some Midwest farmers. So, yeah, they're not all that way, mind you, but the ones that exist are pretty strong in their desire to take you to court about things. So we do have to keep that in mind when we're looking at these items, and not just for this, but remember we're also giving people advice on when to plant, what they've done, what the weather's going to be like. So they could sue us. You said it was going to be sunny yesterday, and it wasn't. So how do we defend ourselves against that? So that's stuff we do have to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they want to do it through automation, that's great. If they want to do it manually, that's fine. Mostly it's going to be computer assisted. They just need to assure me that they've verified that it works when they give it to me. Mm-hmm. Let's put it this way. I have never met a developer who didn't try to solve a problem with code. So, but if I give them permission to do any way they want to, if I let them discover specification by example on their own, they will do it. If I tell them to do it, they won't. They'll argue that they can't do it because their commitments are too strong and they can't do it. If they come to it, it'll be the best thing they've ever decided, and they'll figure out that it makes their design process work so much better. They don't have to write a bunch of documentation about it because the test cases do that for them. They don't have to say, did I do that or not, because it's right there. You know, all that work that they have to do on the side just goes away. But I can't make that case for them because they will then think, oh, he's forcing that on me. Yeah, so we can do the fun stuff, which is what we got into testing in the first place to do. We got into testing because we love not really breaking things, but we love exploring and figuring out how stuff works and how does this live within a system? What are the interactions? And we didn't get into it to follow behind somebody and pick up their toys. Yeah. Well, it was in reference to a test case management system. So we have testing. We have things that you could probably call a test case, but there's nothing that we would ever store in like a TCM, like Rally or something like that. We don't produce that as any of our stuff. Yeah, well, we're totally using Jenkins. We're doing Git repositories. We're running off of Linux machines that are virtualized. We're fully cloud. We're fully cloud. We are so deep in the clouds that we can feel the rain. So. Yeah, so basically it's like, I let them do what they're good at and build stuff, because I've met a few people who are just showing up to punch a clock and write their lines of code and then go home. Most of us aren't. I mean, especially in the startup world. You don't join a startup and work 16 hours a day to punch a clock. And it's also kind of cool because also what we're doing as a company, and not a shameless plug, by the way, we're hiring. What we're doing, I actually left another company who shall remain nameless, but who rhymes with EA. And because this feels important. I mean, this is what people eat. This is the food that goes into our bodies and keeps us going. And it's making sure that people, and the reason why it's cool is because it's private, is because that means that we can go into places like Ukraine, Brazil, Argentina, India, Africa, that don't have a government that can subsidize their crop insurance. So we can help keep those farmers growing food even if they have a bad year. And to me, that's kind of amazing. So the reason why I bring that up is because if I let the developers make sure what they're doing is meaningful and impactful and won't screw things up, they will. Because that's what they want to do. Why should I say, no, you don't want to do that? That's insulting. So, but if I let them do it and give them the tools to do it, then they can do it, they're happy, I can focus on the stuff that I want to do, and I'm happy, and happy people make happy code. Yeah. No. All right, I think we're out of time, but thank you very much.